Rich, welcome to the podcast. It's really, really good to have you on. Thank you so much. First of all, how are you? How are things going?
I'm very good, thank you, Pete. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real nice opportunity to talk on leadership with someone like yourself. And yeah, I'm excited to share maybe some of the stories and insights that I've had over 20 plus years. And but I'm good, thank you. To answer the question, I'm absolutely great. Enjoying a bit of a transition from full-time coach at the moment, which has been refreshing.
Good stuff. Well, let's go into that a bit later. But to start with, it'd be really good to know how you've got to where you are now, where you came from, but really from a leadership perspective. So if you can talk about a little bit about your journey and maybe some of the challenges along the way, that would be great.
Didn't realize until the last 2 to 3 years of a 20-year, let's say, post-schooling career, that I was actually a leader at every stage of that 20 years in some way, shape, or form. And it wasn't clear to me how that actually looked until quite recently, retrospectively. And what I mean by that is that every role that I've held, and every job and every voluntary role and every aspect of life I tried to perform in, whether that be being a boyfriend, then a husband, and then father, or a son and a brother, etc., have all had elements of leadership within them. And I had my role to play, but didn't really define it as leading at the time. And there are certain elements within that journey where I've had to lead and support in different ways. And over the 20 years, it's evolved to being quite clear in my thinking now as to what that really looks like, which we'll get to later on. I started very non-traditionally. My career has been in high performance sports coaching, predominantly in rugby, but I started in winter sports. I left school and moved into the Alps for a gap year. A lot of people do it, but my gap year ended up being 4 years. I was coaching snowboarding and skiing and enjoying the alpine lifestyle, having initially worked in hospitality and catering. And that was my first insight into coaching and real interaction with people where I had to lead. I was teaching, I was engaging, I was looking after their welfare on the mountain, in the mountains. And it was a hell of a 4 years, which was unintentional, but it really set me up with a thirst and a desire to try and influence people and support people. And that's when I transitioned back to sport and coaching in gyms and performance, health and performance, etc. And that evolved really to coaching a number of teams, being involved at various levels, whether that be sports science as a strength coach, as a fitness coach, or an amalgamation of those. I had a small period at the English Institute of Sport working with GB men's water polo. I was exposed to multiple amateur teams. I worked at a private school mentoring talented athletes, one of whom still currently in the England Rugby Union setup, which I'm very proud of, from his infancy and then into professional sport with initially Leeds Rhinos for 7 years, then on to Salford Red Devils, which was a new franchise at the time in the Rugby Super League, and then on to England, which was a very defining point in my leadership journey, having to fit into a very high-performing team. And then moved to Catalan Dragons in the south of France, again, something that was completely different in a challenging skill set to typical high-performance coaching, sports coaching or leadership. And then I went full circle and came back to Leeds as performance director for the last 3 years. So it's been a whirlwind of a journey. My main principle throughout all of that, which relates directly to leadership qualities, is that always try hard to improve for various different motivational reasons. And that may be a longer answer, to improve day to day, week to week, job to job, year to year, through that cycle, to be a better practitioner, a better person, probably ultimately. And that's been the main driver. There have been a lot of influences on the way. The principle that I come back to is that you have to apply to be good, world class at anything. You have to apply effort. It's simple as that. And I look back at reflection and think, have I tried to be better. And I absolutely have, which has helped me on the journey that I've had.
Excellent. I mean, firstly, congratulations on such a successful career. You probably feel like it's just the start. Look, let's come back to what you're doing now in a bit, but you've clearly got a really broad experience in lots and lots of different areas. And that effort piece is interesting because that's something I've actually picked up recently from things you've been talking about on social media, and that's really challenged me. Clearly that, putting in a huge amount of effort has been something that has helped you really stand out and has differentiated you. Can we look back at maybe some of the roles you've had, and can you pick out any examples of leadership where your leadership has impacted your organization, or you've had to bring a level of leadership to bring change, or can you think of any examples?
Yeah, the easy answer here would be to talk about the England Rugby League programme in 2017, and we went to World Cup final and we lost by 2 points. I'm not going to use that. So if anyone wants to reach out and hear that story separately, absolutely hit me up. What was probably most impactful in behavioural change and defining my leadership style was my period at Catalan Dragons. And I arrived in France from the World Cup final and was literally championed into France. I may as well have come in on Concorde as the guy who was going to save French Rugby League, along with the coaching staff, the performance guy who'd just been to the World Cup final. And it would have been very, very easy to come in and let ego take over at that point and believe the hype. And the key thing that I tried to retain all the time in that first instance was humility. In that, as a leader, that I had to be humble. Yes, we'd achieved a fair bit to that point, relatively speaking, in the sport, but in Catalan terms, we'd achieved absolutely nothing. It was a blank canvas. It became really apparent very early that communication would be absolutely key. And communicating in a second language, I didn't speak French when I arrived, was going to be a big challenge. And I had to make a huge effort to learn that and embrace the culture and the community and the beliefs and the understanding of all the individuals in the organisation. Ultimately, to get performance improvement, we needed performance improvement on the field. We were very, very poor at the time of my arrival, of our arrival. There was a number of us, and we needed to really upscale our output and become a winning team. So I had to have this humility that it wasn't all going to be, the way I wanted it to be. And I had to adopt 3 real styles in my leadership, which I now can articulate quite clearly. I was there to serve everybody else. Although I was the facilitator and perceivedly the head of the performance element, I had to serve others. I had to work out what they needed and then give them that. It was simple as that. It wasn't what could they do for me. That would come later. It was what could I do for them to make them better and then subsequently raise the performance of the group, individually and collectively. I had to be quite transformational in my thinking, because the French athletes at the time really felt that the ceiling was maybe, I'm just indicating, was, the ceiling was at a certain level. And I clearly felt that the ceiling could be far higher and the expectations could be far higher. So making an evidencing to individuals and then collectively as a group and a team and as an organisation that we could reach far beyond and transform our thinking from what was perceived as acceptable, the norm and the standard. We could go far beyond that. So there's a transformational element of pushing guys, achieve what we thought we could do, and then let's go beyond it. We can go way further. And that applies across all of physical performance, really, but it's a key trait in really good leaders, I believe. And then I had to be very strategic was the third element, that I couldn't do everything at once. So really had to prioritize elements that were going to give us a big return and be patient enough. And the phrase I use commonly now with coaches that I work with is that we slept on it, we'd leave it, we'd let it roll. We were aware of it. We'd let things evolve and work on what could give us our biggest bang for buck early on in terms of our behaviors, etc. That was ultimately to impact more positive performance outcome through behaviors. So that'd be, in my context, body composition change, fitness levels improvement, organizational cohesion, building trust. And where I felt I impacted the most in the organization was that I built trust, because I was able to bring all of those elements together over a 4-year period. Built a level of confidence between myself and the main stakeholders being the players, that I could literally say jump and they would say how high. If I said alley, they were going. They weren't standing still, they were going. And I was really a master at that point of my influence in the environment. And that took time, and it didn't happen straight away. But I look back to those kind of pillars, and humility being the first one. Didn't have all the answers. I was still getting support from external, from other people, which is something more to talk about. I was very, very, accepting of other people's opinions and tried to evolve and adapt to that. And final part of that, where I felt we got massive wins, was that we're grateful to each other. We displayed gratitude when someone did something well, not just their job, because don't applaud a fish for swimming, don't applaud a rugby player for playing rugby, but when they do it very well, then we show gratitude and we say thank you. And the power of thank you in any language and care is significant. The French taught me something in return, and you'll laugh at this, Pete, because you understand the French culture, that when I arrived in France, obviously the French, they kiss sometimes one on one cheek, sometimes two, depending on the region and the level of familiarity for those that don't know. And if you're really in the circle, you can get three, bang, 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 which is just ridiculous. And for a guy from Yorkshire who'd been brought up a certain way, and I'm very grateful for my upbringing, by the way, I just thought kissing other dudes was just a bit crazy. And I was like, I'm not into that. I'll shake your hand. Hi, how are you? We might hug if we have a big win, but the kissing was too much for me too early. 3 or 4 years down the line, now I'm a big smoocher. I'm going to tell you why very briefly. That level of engagement, that level of understanding, that level of care dawned on me, and in science hat on, is that all these guys doing this were showing affection and care. That was magnifying the level of trust between each other. And also, they were getting oxytocin for free, which is a feel-good hormone. And I'd missed out on 3 years of this goodness by going, I don't need that. So the French taught me quite a lot, which is a daft story in itself. But as a maturer coach and leader now, and I'll probably talk more about care a bit later, I realise how important that is when it's layered onto the process and the outcome that I've just talked about, and the journey and the styles of leadership required to elicit a positive performance outcome.
Well, that's brilliant. No, that's fantastic. The kissing story is funny because I kind of had a similar experience when I was in France, and it was often kisses and a slap on the bum if you're really, if you're really friendly. But like you said, it's showing a level of trust. It's showing a level of openness, and I love that oxytocin kind of example as well. That's fantastic. What I really liked about what you were saying there is that on reflection, you've managed to go look back at some of the real values of leadership you have brought. Obviously, you were deliberate at the time about working in a certain way, but I just love some of those values that you were pulling out around, communication that was a challenge, not being able to speak French at the start, and serving others and being strategic and transformational and bringing influence and having influence. And that only really comes when people trust you, unless you bring influence in the wrong way, as we know some leaders do. But no, I really appreciate you sharing those things. What do you think are some of the challenges that you've had either there at Castellan? I mean, you touched on some of them, or in other experiences or other examples that you've got in roles that you've had. What kind of experiences of challenge have you had as a leader that might even be quite common to other leaders?
It's easy when you do a podcast or a webinar and you get asked the first question to talk about your career journey to mention everything that's been positive. And what I didn't qualify the last question by saying, when I left Catalan, they were a champion team. They were a top 4 team. We'd won a Challenge Cup in 2018, which I might elaborate more a little bit in a minute. Prior to that, in my journey, I'd won the grand final twice, been to World Cup final, won the Challenge Cup, won the League Leaders Shield with Catalan. I'd been on a journey that had been trophy laden, but what a lot of people don't talk about and don't acknowledge is the losses and the hard bits and the bits that truly make you resilient. And that's the word that I probably come back to answer this question, is the resilience element of good leadership. That now more than ever, we're all being exposed to positivity via social media, highlights reels of people's lives and the great things that happen. And it is a false narrative to think that all this happens easily and there aren't tough bits, awful bits, whether that be personal tragedy, professional difficulties, etc., that snowball into our journeys as leaders. So resilience for me is huge. And the most, losing big games, losing a World Cup final was impactful. It was really disappointing. Winning in 2018 was huge for the club and the brand, because prior to that, and I'll just go back, hopefully if you'd not just joined the call or the podcast, rewind 7 minutes. I arrived in France as a hero. Within 11 rounds or 14 games, something like that, I was actually a villain because the team weren't performing. And it was incredibly difficult because we were trying to influence change. And it didn't just do this linear progression of what we suddenly start winning and everything's great. We were 3 wins from 11 in the first 3 months. And I was living with the head coach at the time. That proved to be an absolute godsend. And that godsend was that we were together to share the difficult period and communicate really to the minute about our emotion and our beliefs and what we felt we could do to shift this this pattern that we're seeing where we weren't performing. And the message was that we had to stick to the process, and we did that. We came out of it and we put a run together and we won the cup. It was about 2 months later. And that was go back full circle to they built statues of us outside the stadium. Kind of, it's that fickle. But the resilience element of leadership and key moments is so impactful. But do we all acknowledge that enough and take the learns from it? The most recent example of resilience that I'll share was more a one-to-one basis, in that I had a player who had a stroke at training in some very low intensity warm-up activity. Peak fit individual, training history like you would not believe, an animal of a rugby league player, international level, NRL winner, and he was a good teammate and friend for me, colleague. But watching this guy collapse and holding him as he collapsed, having a stroke at the time, was a game changer for me. And it just made me realize how short life actually can be. Fortunately for him, we were able to give him the medical care that he needed. If that had happened in the street, we don't know what the outcome would have been. We were able to give him the care. The medics were brilliant. And he subsequently had heart surgery, had a small hole in his heart repaired. And then concluding part of this is that he couldn't play rugby then. But what he could do was low-grade physical activity, and he lived to train, lived to perform. So, not through no professional obligation, but more through an element of care and camaraderie, we chatted a lot, and I felt a real affinity to the guy, that we ended up starting running very, very slowly under medical supervision, and we built to quite quickly from a 5K to participating in the Leeds 10K for the Heart Foundation, which we did at a very controlled rate, which was huge for him, seeing his life relight in front of him rather than life being over as he knew it as a professional athlete. And subsequently, we ran a half marathon together, which was a lifetime achievement for him. And he's gone on to become a very kind of accomplished ultra runner, as he's now not playing top level rugby. The resilience he showed was just mind blowing to me, because it would have been easy to give up. And he's influenced me because I did that out of care, but the care that it reciprocated, we've built something that's far more important than win or lose, far more important than money, although we all have to pay the mortgage. That level of care and that level of understanding as men between each other. We now share all elements of life and challenge between each other because of the bond we forged. And it was a very extreme example of something that brought us together on that level. And we're uber different in background, uber different, but we're very, very common in thinking around how we should behave, how we should be as men, how we'd like to be perceived as leaders, etc. So going back to the answer to the question would be, resilience is probably absolutely key as a point of difference, and a key moment for me. There are a couple there, but yeah, it's been a key moment in changing my thinking.
So to unpack the resilience part a bit more, so clearly you observed this guy's resilience and learned a lot off him, but have you got any practices that help you build resilience, whether it's, I don't know, positive thinking or positive self chat or talk, or have you got anything that you really deliberately, intentionally do to build resilience? Because we know that tough times can be sink or swim for leaders, and you've managed to just keep climbing up the rungs of the leadership ladder, becoming more influential, more mature, getting better roles, and we'll talk about what you're doing now soon. But what are your personal practices in really building and cultivating that resilience, which is so important?
Well, I learned this from the very, very best athletes in the world, and I've not dropped, I don't think, any names to this point. I'm going to drop two now, if that's okay. Kevin Sinfield, I was lucky to coach Kevin, and most people will know of Kevin now in world rugby based on not just his ability as a rugby player and a leader of men, but his work for MND as an ambassador for the late Rob Burrow. And Rob also influenced me. He's the coach, both of them, early in my coaching career. And what they did unbelievably well, relentlessly, was the basics. And you're thinking, well, is that the answer? Well, actually, yeah. Have a foundation, have some beliefs that you, no matter what, which I alluded to with the Catalan scenario, no matter what are your non-negotiables as a leader? And then go back to those in times of duress, times of struggle, go back to those. And, I make that as simple as this, probably 5 points now, is when I'm under mental duress, I maintain my physical activity. Keep active. It's a huge layer of therapy for me, and I know for other people. Again, we could go down the endorphin route and talk chemicals, etc. But maintain your levels of physical activity. Number two, maintain communication with the people that you care about and influence you positively. So whether that be your wife, a couple of close friends, inner circle, just being present as a parent, maintain balance and communication with those around you. Do not close off from those people. As much as it's easy to do that and become quite full vision when in periods of duress, that's probably the least productive in my view. Number three would be to seek external counsel and or journal. I do both. I have a really good circle of trusted friends who I regard as friends, who regard very highly, specialists that I've picked out really, and they've picked me. I would say that we've built bonds and friendship through mutual interest, but I usually respect their opinion. I go to them. I'm quite open if I'm struggling or I've got a challenge, and that brings me back to 99 times out of 100. It's just being able to say it, and other times it's getting their advice and getting the steer. Well, what would you do? And being humble enough to accept others' opinion. I don't have all the answers here. That's the third, and then probably point 4 or 3A, however you want to look at it, would be to write things down, journal your challenges, reflect and review quite strategically, I do that. I write my goals down. I write them down periodically. I revisit them periodically, and that's down to daily the strength conditioning coaching me and the micro, the meso, and the macro cycle stuff of trying to make sure that within small periods, making progress. And then the fifth one is trying, and I've had to become a lot better at this, is being kind to myself. When I find it really, really difficult, this challenge in leadership or in life, is to not focus too much on what we've not achieved. Point five is actually looking at what we have achieved and what we have done well. Because as a human race, I don't know whether it's the Brits or it's worldwide. I can't comment on that, but we're really good at kind of selling ourselves short rather than saying, look, well, this is what we have achieved. And that's not getting carried away and being overexcited. It's actually acknowledging that we're doing and what we class as high performance or productive leaders is often, we've done a lot more than we think, and acknowledging that is very, very important in the grand balance. So they're my five that I kind of stick to rigorously. I need drawing in and I wouldn't say I stayed in that circle perfectly all the time. There's always elements of time when you drift and come back, but it's having those pillars, go back to that word, that guide me, and that comes to doing basics really well. When we talk about that in performance aspects, there's no point in doing really Hollywood stuff if your sleep, your nutrition and your hydration are wrong. Forget it. You can have the best training plan in the world, can't you? But that's a different answer.
Well, that's good, and those pillars are foundational to you, clearly. The third one you mentioned about seeking external counsel, I find interesting because there's a lot of leaders out there who do feel isolated, and that whole saying no man is an island or no one is an island. There are a lot of leaders out there who are out on their own, whether it's their own choice or not. Have you got any advice to people listening on how to bring people in, how to engage? Because it's quite difficult for men in particular, I think, sometimes to open up and embrace help and get external counsel. Have you got any tips or words of advice on how you've done that?
Yeah. I think if the room you're in doesn't offer you the level of support and care that you feel you need to thrive, then I would actively encourage you to change room. And that might be, what do you mean, Rich? Well, we've all been in roles where we feel potentially undervalued, or as leaders on our journey, you potentially feel undervalued. And there has to come a point, if that's the case, where you either, and we talk about this with performance staff and employees, or you need to change the people to align with your philosophies as a leader. That's absolutely, very rarely does everyone align straight away. You need to influence some level of change as a leader to get people to tie into common goal. And at some point, you have to change the people. If you can't change the people, that's the phrase, right? Some people just don't fall into that. And that's cool. That's what I've learned latterly, is that, particularly in the professional working space, is that not every role in world sport will be for me, and not every world sporting organization will want Rich Hunwicks. But I have my principles and beliefs, and this is part of life, that sometimes people and things don't align. That's fine. And that's took a bit of time for me to acknowledge that. Probably in the last 10 years, I've become a lot better at that. But to kind of go back to the question, is that if you can find people in your room or in your organization that can support you to flourish and will listen, the forgotten art of communication, will actually listen and then respond accordingly rather than react. Because a lot of people react to stuff, snap decision. Well, let's be quite strategic and take a breath and respond to a situation that someone's in, whether it be me or someone else, etc., and then evolve and develop accordingly. And if you found that, then brilliant. That's going to help you grow and embrace that. And particularly as a man, I'm guessing this is a predominantly male audience, that don't view it as a sign of weakness to say, I actually need help. Because you'd be amazed how many other blokes out there in the, I'm going to say 21 to 50 to 60 to 70 age brackets, if you'd range, would answer that with, well, yeah, me too. How can I help you? Full circle, as a leader, the first question as a servant leader is, what can I do for you? Not what can you do for me? That's the first question. And generally, if you are in the right room with the right people who are going to support you, then if you say, I need help, the first thing they'll say is, yeah, how can I help you? Not, oh, what am I going to get from it? And they're the kind of people you need to surround yourself by. It's easier said than done. And there are a million different outlets for leadership programs, coaching programs, etc., support networks. But they are out there, and finding something that is authentic and credible, I think, is absolutely key, and that you can build trust with. We talked about trust quite a bit, and build trust with, and that has no agenda, will be the place you want to be. And that might be someone who's already in your circle. It might be someone who's a complete neutral stranger, external, and that can be a great thing as well. But the close message on here is, in a day and age where social media again is so prevalent, don't be afraid to reach out if you feel isolated or you're struggling. And I use the word struggling with current business branding quite frequently, because there are more people than we think out there in very much the same mindset. No one has all the answers. And I guarantee that the most successful business leaders and stories out there, we're all quite well versed in many of them, have had similar struggles. And I candidly will say that I am better for having now in my latter years more support from others and being able to approach others with the mindset of, you can help me, or please can you help me? And I don't have all the answers, to maybe how does a junior leader, teammate, coach, well, I think I've got a lot of the answers, I'm okay here. Well, in reality, I didn't have that many. And evolving over the last 20 years has been pivotal to my success.
There's some really practical suggestions and ideas in there, which I think can be really, really helpful to people who are looking for that external support, that counsel. So thank you for being open and vulnerable and sharing those stories. You've mentioned care a number of times, clearly an important value or aspects of your leadership. Can you unpack it a little bit more? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah. I think in any context, and it's an unmeasurable, we can't produce a research paper, we can't reference this, I wish I could, that care can be the difference in numerous contexts. I used to view athletes as commodity, literally, very, very black and white, of, if I get you stronger, you lift this, you will get stronger. You run this far, you will get quicker. You run this long, you will get faster, fitter, etc. And didn't really care or have any interest in the person. And what has become more and more apparent is that the psychosocial influences and circumstance for any one individual are huge in eliciting any kind of performance potential, any kind. Again, in the sporting world, rugby performance, you can have the best weights program, the best running program, best nutrition program, but if athlete A is going through a torturous time at home, potentially going through a divorce, that emotional stress will manifest itself somehow in their physical being, and the likelihood is that's some kind of injury. Again, I can't prove this, but the biggest causation of injury in professional sport is new baby, moving house, divorce, or moving overseas. Coupled that with training load, because everything that we're doing in day-to-day functioning as people adds stress to us. We call it load in sport, but it's stress. And those stresses and strains are manifested in different ways in different people. And I've dealt with guys who were hugely robust and resilient and could literally plow through any level of exposure of physical training, any extreme, could starve themselves, dehydrate themselves to death, go off no sleep, go drinking all weekend and still perform on a Monday. And they're under huge stress and strain. And then the other end of the spectrum, guys who worried chronically about what training would be, what the content would be, what the wife was, whether the wife could pick up the kids, and would then subsequently have a sore back or a sore Achilles or a small issue. But when it came to actual end of week performance in match play, they were the best player on the field. But the whole week had been, or the whole period, littered with these struggles and stresses and strains. So how could I, as a performance leader, support them? And the difference was actually understanding those elements that were affecting them and then manipulating lifestyle, workload, training load, circumstance, scheduling to support, minimizing the impact of those. You're never going to eradicate them, and you're not a marriage counsellor in using that as an example, but players that come from overseas, and I've done it every which way, is why would I train them hard in the first 7 to 10 days of arrival? It's just a nonsense. I don't need to prove to anybody that I'm a good fitness trainer. I need to make sure that they're available to play and perform when they're selected. And it's having that patience and maturity to understand what they could tolerate. And again, comes back to communication with each person, each individual. Some of them are hugely tolerant, as I said, and they wouldn't respond negatively at all to any more load, stress, or strain. And others would. I look back personally at when I landed in France. I found the first year very, very difficult because of the stress and strain of my family not settling in the country. My children were upset every day. They were crying going to school. And how that manifested for me was I was just perpetually emotionally drained. And I was going to work trying to be the energizer, trying to influence change, trying to be the leader, be the thermostat, not the thermometer. I was going to gauge the energy all the time and make sure that I was giving and giving and giving. But all those other factors, it nearly broke me. And, in hindsight, managing that I found some good, again, I'm still in contact with the pastor at the Catalan Dragons, who was very, very caring to me. And that resonated with me. And that's something that he didn't have to do that. Very caring and checked in on me. That I try and transfer that level of care now into the people that I work with and the players that I work with, and understanding all those factors. So to round up the multitude of factors that affect people, and remember, here's the punchline, that they are people first in any walk, shape or context of business or life. It's person first. And we've all probably heard the phrase that everyone's fighting a battle that we don't know about. That's absolutely key. If we want optimal performance from people and leaders, we have to understand intrinsically what they need and how we can support them to do that. So that's where I come back to the person and care being way ahead of what they can bench press, squat, or run.
It's refreshing to hear that, because there's a lot of situations in elite sport where that's just not the case, that you can't find anyone who really, really cares for you. And that can be a really tough place to be. So to have somebody like you, who's the leader, who's bringing that philosophy and that environment, would be a real comfort for players. What I'd like to do now is to ask you about some of your frameworks and models that you use as a leader. I know from speaking to you that you kind of think in models and frameworks. So, and I've been quite impressed with some of the things that you've come out with, and probably not even aware that you've said it, but you've said something and it's really structured and it's really ordered and it's really, and so for me, this is where the gold lies. I'm really excited to hear some of the things that you use in your own leadership, whether it's intentionally or it's just something that just comes naturally to you. Have you got any sort of structures and frameworks that you can talk to us about?
Yeah, I'll probably cover a little bit of the topics that I've talked about generally for the last 40 minutes. And when I did prepare for this, I'm not going to BS anybody, I wrote some notes. That's the cornerstone of good performance is preparation. And I knew straight away that when I saw the general theme of Informed Performance podcast, that as a leader, that there were 4 kind of champion teammate behaviors that I would base what I wanted to talk about on. And I'll share those in more clarity now, if that's okay.
Go
so
for
I
it.
have, and all good people have copyright on their imagery, right? So you can take this how you want. So for me, when I look at leadership and models and frameworks for my delivery, I have the base of a triangle or the foundation of the house being world-class basics. So make sure that I'm managing myself first with sleep, with good food, with health and hydration. That will support my mental clarity and general well-being, and my ability to be a good person, a good father, a good brother, a good sister, good uncle, whatever it needs to be in my context. So keep to the basics. Layered on top of that, the champion teammate behaviors, I come back to 4 all the time. Effort was the first one I talked about. If I pack something, any given task, with absolute effort, I can look in the mirror when I go to bed, go, you know what, giving it everything I could give it. And I've been in some situations, even in the last couple of weeks, where thinking, do I really need this in my life right now? I've got the luxury of choice, and maybe talk about choice again in a second, that do I really need this? And my initial easy option, let's do it now. The easy option would have been to say, don't really need that. I'll take that easy route and push it to one side. The harder choice was to say, yeah, actually, I'll do it. And I'm going to have to invest some real time and get really pushed in my thinking boundaries on a new topic to deliver something of high quality. And then I'm speaking a little bit in code here, and then not even knowing the outcome of it, whether it's useful or not. Just don't know. And as performance guys, you like to know the outcome, win, lose, whatever. And that can be a killer when you don't know where it's going to go. And so my point here is choice, right? We've got easy and hard choices in everything in life, but choice is an absolute privilege. It is a privilege. Imagine having all choices taken away from you. Life would be awful, absolutely awful. And that can come down to what you eat and what activity you do in a day, the way you behave. And quite often, if you take the easy option, the easy choice or perceivably easy option, that's not always the best outcome. It can sometimes be negative. It's not always the best outcome. If you take the harder option, there generally is a real positive outcome at the end of that. And the way in this particular context, I jumped onto this task and thought, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to give all out effort to it. And if it doesn't take off, doesn't become successful, it's not the outcome that I want, then what have I lost? And the answer is absolutely nothing, because I've given time, I've done research, I've made notes, I've broadened my thinking. I'm actually better for it, and that will pay me back somewhere later on. It would have been easy to go, sod it, I'll watch another episode of Netflix. Made the harder choice, and I'll do that. So effort, everything. And if you're going to do it properly. So there's one of my 4. The humility element of being able to remain gracious, take other people's opinion, reflect and review, and act accordingly. That's absolutely key. There's 1% of the time, though, when you shouldn't be humble, in my opinion, and some great leaders have influenced me on this, is when you get asked, can you execute something? Can you do this? Can you achieve that? If you inherently believe you can, then sort of humility, yes, I can. The humble answer would be, oh, maybe I could, I think I've got the skills, and say, I'd love to see if I could try. No, I can do it. I can do this, and I'm going to nail it. And that's a 1% of the time. That's not arrogance. That's confidence and belief in my own ability to go, I can do that. And so that's important, the humility element, and maintain that confidence with it. But don't veer off towards arrogance, of course. Gratitude is key. So I come back to that. I'm grateful to have the choice. I'm grateful for all the things and the people that influence me around me. It's not always easy to be grateful. You can be resentful because of the world we live in, I think, and look at what others have got. But comparison is absolutely the thief of joy, right? Teddy Roosevelt quote. It is, just do what I focus on now is doing me in my framework. Just do me. Don't worry about, as a young practitioner, I worried about what everyone else was doing and be like them, want to do that, want to try and achieve that because he's doing it. Look where he's got. Now I view everybody as just as a colleague rather than a competitor, if that's the right way of looking at it. And if anyone ever reaches out, always try and assist, whether it's to my benefit or not, really. And that's changed, whereas 10, 15 years ago, I may have looked at that differently. So having that ability, that gratitude and humility combined goes back round to resilience, in that's described there being my framework, being trying to be a good dude. Ultimately, I think have good champion behaviors, be a good person. That you have to have resilience, because sometimes it doesn't go well, and just because you're being a good dude doesn't mean it's all going to happen for you. So there are no's, there are tough bits, there are times when you think, well, why has that happened? And life's not fair. Life's not fair, is it? So having that resilience just to keep ticking away, stick to those foundations. That's so if my base in my period was my world-class basics, and then I'm building on, or whatever order, those champion behaviors, that's kind of my framework that I come back to. And I credit my father here, that he always used to say to me, treat people as you want to be treated. And that just sits on the side of my life framework of, I just would like to, would always like to think I'd adhere to that, and that then I can go to bed at night, with a really clear conscience. So whatever your framework or model looks like, it may be different to that, it may have different values within it, but those behaviors and values are key. And, good things. It's no coincidence that good people attract good people. And I'm sat on this call with yourself, Pete, who I regard very highly, that it's no coincidence that you want to be around people like yourself and other people that we know as a consequence.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. That's so good to be able to learn off other people. And that is the whole reason why I do this podcast. I want young leaders to be able to, learn from your experience, your frameworks, your models, what works for you, and to really find their way. So appreciate you sharing that. Let's talk about what you're doing now. You've spoken about your journey. Rugby league was a big part of that. What are you doing now? How do you spend your time? What are you hoping to do more of in the future?
It's been a very, very interesting last 3 months for me. I've gone from 20 years basically in a washing machine of professional sport. And for those that have never been in or around it, it's a great environment, and it's given me huge amount, but it's all encompassing. And it literally does never stop. Win or lose one game on a Friday night, within 1 minute of the final whistle, the mind is into preparation for the next, and very limited rest opportunities, because through my 20 years I've been lucky enough to do international rugby and various things, it leaves very limited time for self-care, personal care, and all the other things in life. So for all the brilliance and benefits it gave me, I made a decision 3 months ago, well, I made over a year ago, that it was time for me to step away from coaching and leading performance structures on a full-time basis. Over the last 3 years, I've spent more and more time with corporate clients, sponsors, and various different outlets of business, influencing leadership behaviors, talking about the parallel between business and sport, and that gave me a real appetite for doing that professionally, effectively. So I took a bit of a step into the unknown in that making leadership and performance keynote speeches one of my primary sources of income. I work with an agency called VALD Talent and Speaking, a range of different topics that I talk about, but basically linking to the high performance behaviors in sport and parallels in business. Some of it is quite anecdotal, if that's what the client requires, and some of it is quite science based, depending on the level of detail that they want to delve into, or any version of that. So, and that's exciting. It's really fulfilling, actually, seeing people's eyes light up when they hear things that I took for granted in the professional sport setting, but maybe in business it's just either not spoken about or not acknowledged enough, and the realization of that those similarities is absolutely intriguing to me, and seems to be to many other people. On top of that, I'm doing a number of different layers of deliveries around corporate wellness. So I have a company with a colleague of mine. He's the founder, Josh Taylor. We run the Everyday Athletes, an online coaching community. We have around 100 clients who are basically hybrid athletes. The key is in the title, Everyday Athlete. We program training and nutrition support around lifestyle for each individual, depending on their aims and outcomes. It's a really cool community, actually, and we have spent some time now taking our model of delivery across the corporate sector. So we've been talking to a number of businesses about giving a blanket style or coaching, layer of coaching to corporate clients, whether that be the chief exec or the chief exec and the leadership team, or the leadership team and senior staff, or all staff. And we can cater for quite a huge number. So we've been upscaling quite significantly, quite quickly. And that's been great, because we get to go into businesses and actually deliver sometimes some strategy around performance enhancement, day-to-day behaviors, etc. But we look at the challenges they've got and deliver solutions based on that, typically. So that's layer 2. And then layer 3 for me is my personal brand, which is really evolving around supporting individuals, whether that be business or general lifestyle, around performance behaviors and leadership, mentoring individuals. We've talked about guys needing care, leaders needing care. Well, I've got 2 or 3 guys that I work with one-to-one, and we talk around their leadership behaviors, talk around strategies to develop their daily functioning, enhance their productivity around the workplace. And that can take any way, shape or form it needs to. I work to a certain framework, as you alluded to, but it's very much individual dependent. My 4th and final small strand is the, you won't be able to see on the podcast, guys, I'm wearing an LYP t-shirt. The LYP brand is Land Your Plane. That's my clothing subsidiary. And I know Pete's the owner of one of my t-shirts, which is cool.
I should have worn it. I was going to wear it.
Land Your Plane was born about 2 years ago, and it's basically a reference to, it's very short. If you've ever been in a Ryanair flight, my time when I was traveling with Catalan a lot, and people clap the pilot for landing the plane, I used to sit there shaking my head and go, guys, you're clapping. Why are you clapping? If he hadn't done his job and landed the plane, we'd all be dead, so we wouldn't be clapping. And it's a bit cynical, but the moral here being is, let's do our jobs and do them well. And there's a lot of guys out there that do their job and do it well. And that pilot wasn't sat there saying, I hope they applaud me. He was just landing the plane. So for a season with one of the teams I was with, we coined the phrase, actually introduced this concept. And it was like, look, do your job, land your plane. Just do your job and do it well. And that's evolved into a bespoke brand of tees and hoodies, which runs along quietly with the help of a few friends. We set that up, and it's just a little bit of a highlight and lifestyle highlight that I like to keep ticking along, and has expanded my thinking around marketing, around social media, etc., in a really good way to the norms that I would normally be charged with.
Brilliant. I mean, it's good to hear you speak so enthusiastically around what you're doing now. And for me, I'm really keen to keep in touch with you and see where things go. But great that you're doing such a diverse spectrum of different things in this new phase, this new season of your life. Just to wrap up, Rich, I really appreciate your time. It's been fantastic listening to you, and it's actually reminded me we need to grab another coffee just so I can sit there and absorb all this wisdom that's oozing. But just to wrap up, are there any closing comments that you want to make? Any final things that you really wanted to say about leadership that you've not managed to get in?
I don't profess to have all the answers, and if you've listened to the 55 minutes here and it's come across that, well, this guy's really got it together, that's great. But it's took me a long time to get to this point of thinking and have the level of clarity that I've got and the confidence in that thinking that I know what I want to look like. I know what I expect of other people that surround me. And I know what I should be as a professional and as a father and as a husband. And none of the closing statement on this, none of my journey and my evolution was possible without the people around me. And I've talked passionately about some of the people that have influenced me. But if you are lucky enough to be married or have a partner and even have children, I would encourage all leaders out there not to lose sight of or aspiring leaders, whatever stage you're at, of the absolute key things which define us as people, which is family. I suffered a couple of losses. Both my parents had passed, one of them very unexpectedly at quite a young age, relatively speaking. And those stamps in the life timeline are huge and impactful. But the most important thing and influences that have allowed me to do what I've done as a personal coach with my wife and my two children. And I'm very grateful to them. And I am guilty sometimes of not expressing that enough. And I talk about gratitude quite frequently. And I would encourage anyone who's aspiring as a leader and on a journey to be very patient, realize that it's a constant evolution, and value those things that are closest to you intrinsically, because money, status, perceived status, they're important, okay, but they're nowhere near as important as the human connections that we have with those closest to us. So hopefully that's not too downbeat or too heavy for the end of the podcast. But I'd just stick with that and say that if you on your journey at an early stage, mid or late stage, and you want to reach out based on what you've heard, don't hesitate. Whether that's, as Pete and I just alluded to, having a coffee or exchanging an email. I genuinely mean that. If I can help someone who's struggling, I absolutely will. So thanks for listening. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And that resonates with me. As you know, family are really important to me too. So it's really good to hear you say that. So just finally, where can people find you, follow you, hear more from you? Did you get that? Sorry, Rich. I don't know if you lost connection there.
Yeah, where can you get hold of me? Yeah. At Rich Hunwicks on Twitter. So that is HUNWICKS. I believe there is only one of me, yeah, at Rich Hunwicks. And LinkedIn, Richard Hunwicks at LinkedIn, I believe, as well. But I think there's only one of me as well. It's a very unique surname. Everyone gets it wrong. Love it. But that's, yeah, it's a silent W. And yeah, generally, I use Insta as a bit more of my informal stuff and some leadership and culture and behaviors now, which is quite enjoying actually. That evolving and do a bit of blogging, but it's way out of my comfort zone because I've been in the shadows for a long time. So, but I keep being told that, you know, you need to be out there and let people know who you are as a person, that human touch, and I've been quite private and intrinsically motivated for a long time. So that's cool. And then LinkedIn I use a little bit more formally and try and offer resource on there a little bit and opinion pieces, and if people want to connect off the back of it, so much the better. But that's been good fun as well. So yeah, just jump out to me. I'll know it if you want to connect.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Huge thanks from me, Rich. Really appreciate it. I'll remember there's only one Rich Hunwicks, so that's my that's my takeaway. But no, big thank you from me. Really appreciate your time, and yeah, look forward to seeing you soon.
Belting. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Cheers. See ya. Bye.